We look at ancient Egypt and see perfect obedience, stone giants, silent workers, and gods who were never questioned. But that story ends the day the builders walked out. Not rebels with swords, not invading armies, but hungry craftsmen with empty stomachs, and nothing left to lose. To understand why this mattered, you must first understand what Egypt promised its people. Order, bread, stability. Ma'at wasn't just a belief. It was the system that kept the world from collapsing into chaos. The Nile would rise, grain would come, the gods would provide, and in return, the people worked. They hauled stone, carved names into eternity, and built the afterlife for kings they would never become. This wasn't just architecture. It was obedience made visible, power turned into stone. But the story of Egypt's greatness doesn't end with monuments. It ends in a workers' village, with late wages, spoiled grain, and rising anger. The village was called Deir el-Medina. It housed the elite craftsmen who carved the tombs of the pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings. These were not anonymous slaves in chains. They were trained specialists, painters, stonecutters, scribes, men trusted with eternity itself. And for years, the state paid them in grain, beer, oil, fish, and cloth. Enough to survive. Enough to believe the system still worked. But then, the Bronze Age world began to crack. Kingdoms trembled, trade routes failed, empires bled resources they could no longer replace. This wasn't just a local shortage. It was a system-wide failure, spreading through the eastern Mediterranean like a slow, invisible fire. In Egypt, the stress reached the workers last. And that made it worse. Because by the time the pain hit them, the machine was already failing. At first, the payments came late. A few days, then more. Excuses followed. Delays, promises, silence. Then the cupboards emptied. Children got hungry. Wives rationed scraps. Men who painted eternal life could not feed their own families. Imagine the smell of stale grain dust, empty beer jars, old oil, hot mud brick walls trapping the desert heat. This was not glory. This was decay. The men complained, quietly, at first. Surely the officials would fix it. Surely the pharaoh's order would return. Surely. But hunger changes the math of power. A man who fears starving children fears the palace less. Around 1159 BC, during the reign of Ramesses III, the impossible happened. The royal workers stopped working. No shouting, no riot. Just a line crossed, and a silence more dangerous than noise. They marched out together, not away from duty, but toward visibility, toward the sacred spaces the state could not ignore. They sat near the mortuary temples, places built for divine kings, places designed to project eternal control. And then they delivered their message. We are hungry. We have no clothes. We have no oil. We have no fish. That sentence still survives on papyrus. Not as legend, not as myth, but as a worker complaint, preserved for 3,000 years. Think about that. The first recorded strike in history was not born in a factory, but in the shadow of a pharaoh's tomb. Officials panicked, because this wasn't just hunger anymore. It was public disobedience in a system built on sacred hierarchy. If the men who built eternity no longer believed the state would feed them, what did that say about the gods? This wasn't just a wage dispute. It was a crack in the theology of power. So the authorities tried the oldest tactic in politics: buy time, promise payment, move the men, calm the moment. A partial ration arrived, some grain, a little relief. Enough to pause the crisis, but not enough to repair the trust, because the strike did not happen once. It happened again and again, as shortages kept returning. That is what makes this moment so modern. The workers learned something terrifying. Collective pressure worked. The state had forced them to work together for years. Now that same organization turned back on the state itself. And still, this is not a story most people know. We remember the pharaohs. We remember the gold. We forget the ration lines. History loves monuments. But monuments do not tell you when the grain stopped coming. The papyri do. The complaints do. The cracks in bureaucracy do. And they tell a darker story. Ramesses III still looked powerful on the walls. Huge, divine, victorious. But power on stone is not the same as power in a granary. That may be the deepest lesson here. Civilizations do not always collapse in battle. Sometimes they falter in payroll, logistics, and bread. And when the basics fail, even sacred systems begin to look negotiable. The men of Deir el-Medina did not overthrow Egypt, but they exposed something even more dangerous. Its limits, and for generations, Egypt taught that the pharaoh maintained order between heaven and earth. But hungry workers discovered order had a supply chain. That idea is explosive. Because once people see power as a system, not a miracle, they can begin to challenge it. And that is why this strike echoes so far beyond Egypt. It is the sound of workers realizing they are not alone. Not in a parliament, not in a union hall, in a desert village, beside the tombs of kings. If you only look at the monuments, you miss the most human part of the story. The moment fear changed sides. Because until then, the workers feared the state. Now the state feared what happened if the workers stopped. That reversal is ancient, but it feels immediate, almost uncomfortably modern. And maybe that is the real perspective shift. Ancient Egypt was not only built by divine order, it was held together by labor agreements. Break the agreement, delay the grain, neglect the people who do the work, and even a god king begins to look vulnerable. We often imagine ancient people as trapped inside systems they could never resist. The workers of Deir el-Medina prove otherwise. They petitioned, they organized, they leveraged visibility, they understood pressure points in the system and used them. That is not primitive resistance, that is political intelligence, 3,000 years before the modern strike manual. And yet, it emerged from something brutally simple. Feed us, or the tombs stop. That may be the sentence every ruling system fears most. Not rage, not speeches, just the shutdown of necessary work. Because empires look immortal, right up until the people who run them refuse to continue. The strike at Deir el-Medina did not destroy the new kingdom overnight, but it revealed the rot inside the walls. A state can still hold ceremonies, still carve victory scenes, still speak the language of order, while quietly failing the people beneath it. And that dual reality, spectacle above, scarcity below, is one of the oldest political stories on Earth. So yes, the tomb builders walked out. But what they really walked out on was the illusion that power was untouchable. And once that illusion breaks, history changes. Quietly at first, then all at once. We think of history as kings, wars, and monuments, but sometimes the hinge of an age is an empty stomach, an unpaid ration, a missed delivery, a delayed promise. That is how divine order begins to come apart. The first labor strike in recorded history was not born from ideology, it was born from necessity, sharpened by dignity. That is why this story matters, not because it is ancient, but because it feels alive. Because every civilization makes promises. Feed the people, reward the work, keep the order. And when those promises fail, the silence of ordinary people can become the loudest event in history. So the next time you see ancient Egypt, don't just look up at the stone, look down at the men who stopped. Because in that moment, in that village, in that hunger, the builders of eternity reminded a god king who really kept the world running. Thank you for watching the past so we can understand the present, and together, We keep history reborn. I'll see you in the next era.